بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وبارك على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد Alhamdulillah, we continue with our discussion from Kitab al-Bay' or كما يقال عند البعض يعني بيوع, chapter referring to the transactions, the buying and selling. And previously we discussed the issue of al-Wakālah. Naam, Wakālah referring to what, barakallahu feekum?
If a person fails to pay, he guarantees that he will bring him.
Naam, so that's Wakālah in terms, that's Wakālah when we're referring to the debt. And Wakālah in general. So Wakālah, if the person fails to pay, he brings the individual, the debtor, he brings him forth so that he can essentially either explain himself, pay, or rearrange another arrangement with the creditor. So he makes that agreement. That's more specific if we're referring to al-Wakālah when it comes to the debt, the dain. As for al-Wakālah umuman, generally, or that which is am, general, then what are we referring to? Barakallahu feekum. Carrying out of the role and paper. Naam. So essentially fulfilling an action, a task, a role on behalf of another. Naam. On behalf of another individual. In English we'd call that what? Agency. Naam. Jazakallah khair. We'll call that agency essentially. Naam. And so it's from, or the action, the verb, which is used to refer to this particular dealing is what? You remember? Tawakkul. Tawakkul. Which is what, how? Ta, wow. Alif. Kaf, lam. Tawakkul. As opposed to what? Tawakkul. Na'am, because tawakkul referring to reliance, which is lillah, which is ibadah. Tawakkul. Now, tawakkul when you're entrusting another person with a particular action. And then we mentioned with that as well, this matter of entrusting is done how? Or in what things can we entrust someone with?
You can entrust someone with your own money. With your own money.
With your money to do what?
To hold it or to spend it in the way that he knows you choose.
To hold it or to spend it. Spend it in terms of shopping spree?
You usually buy bananas, so he buys bananas for you without asking.
No, so before that though, we're referring to he spends it in terms of trading is what we do now. Trading. But if you're going to trade with another person's wealth, then you need what? The permission. No, you need their permission, of course. Except for, yeah, Abdullah, you just mentioned it. Except for if it is something which is yani ұрf, yani a custom. And when we say custom can mean one of two things. What did we say? Custom can mean one of two things. One is what the brother just mentioned, Zawla Khair, where it's his specific custom, where it's known that, for example, he does every Monday he buys oranges to sell on a Wednesday, for example. So it's known that's what he does. So it doesn't mean now that he has to ask every time. Now that's his custom. Speak to him. Custom could also refer to what? Barakallahu feek.
Spend it however he wants to increase.
No. Custom. We say custom, not maintenance. General custom. So a general custom that may be known in a particular location, for example. So that in a particular location, that it's a general custom that someone that has money on behalf of another individual can trade in this particular way. For example, it's something which is accepted as a general custom of the people to the extent that as soon as a person hands over his wealth to his wakīl in that regard, then it's understood, yeah, and it's mafhum because they're in that particular location. Naam. So you have the custom which is general and that which is specific. How else can someone be a wakīl? So it can trade for someone on behalf of someone. What else?
Can pay off someone's debt if they fail to pay.
Pay the debt on their behalf, yeah. This is more hawala though, but yeah, you could pay the debt on their behalf. What else? Wakīl. Marriage, how? Wakīl for who or for who? For the sister, meaning? So he's in place of who? Nah, the wali. And we mentioned, barakallahu feek, we mentioned this last week. So the wakīl is in place of the wali. Naam. And we mentioned that this is a term that is generally used here. That's in it's generally understood when we're discussing this matter of marriage or someone that's representing a sister here in the UK, I'm referring to. And we use this term wakīl. Why? You know, remember what we mentioned? Shariva, and then what though? So why do we say wakīl? Because who is the wali? The markaz or the masjid. Naam, because in the non-Muslim land, generally speaking, the markaz, the Islamic center, will establish that role of the what? The wali of who? But in more specifically, more generally, sorry. Wali al-Amr. Naam, the wali al-Amr. So the ruler essentially. So things that are not established that can't be established by the Muslim ruler here because there's no Muslim ruler, then you have the Marakiz al-Islamiyya, specifically Marakiz Salafiyya, that will establish those roles. So from those things is representing a person that is a sister, for example, that needs representation for marriage. Okay, and so the wali is who? You mentioned the wali, but in the non-Muslim land, the UK. So it's not going to be King Charles. No, the masjid. No, it's going to be the masjid as the entity. So then, for example, Imam Fulan is representing the sister, and he's the wakīl on behalf of the masjid. Naam. So he's acting on behalf of an agency on behalf of the masjid. Is that clear? Naam. And so that's generally how we hear the term. But it can also be how? In terms of talking, still referring to the marriage. How can it still be? How can it still have a wakīl? Before that, still talking about someone representing a sister. If the wali himself appoints a wakīl, so he may be the father of the Muslim woman, and for whatever reason, for example, the general occurrence or situation where this would occur is if he's in another land, and he's in another land to his daughter, and then now he appoints the wakīl in that place to establish that marriage and can fulfill the marriage contract. Is that clear, barakallahu feekum? Naam. The wakīl, and then after that, we mentioned the wakīl in what other terms? In terms of marriage, sorry. In what other manner? Just mentioned it for there. Representing the man. So a person now he states that someone will represent him in terms of concluding the marriage contract, and this can occur as well. Now, so generally, this is what we were referring to when we discussed the wakīl, and today we're going to discuss this matter of ash-Sharikah. Now, the issue of ash-Sharikah. So ash-Sharikah is essentially a cooperative venture. A cooperative venture. So where you're trading, but you're not just trading by yourself. You're trading with other individuals or other entities. Now, we mentioned an example of that, a general example last week, if you remember. Does anyone remember what the example we mentioned? No.
You buy a property and you own it with 5 other people.
No, so you buy property, own it with 5 other people. No. And so then what happens?
Everyone owns like 25%.
It's 5 people, then not with 25, but 20%. No, 20%. So if it's 4 people, 25%. 5 people, 20%. And according, you have an ownership. But in this example, of course, they all own equal amounts. But it doesn't have to be that they own equal amounts. No. You just own a share in that particular entity. So in this case, the example that we gave was the property, a house, right? Now you all own, 4 people own, let's say, to 25%. So then they are all eligible for 25% of the income that generates. So let's say it's 25% of the rent, right? So they all are liable for 20, or they all rather can profit from 25% of that rent, now of the property. Also, it also means that they are liable for 25% of expenses, liable for 25% of the costs. Now, so you're all liable for 25% of the costs. So now let's say, for example, you need to change the electrics, and then maybe the electricians are a bit expensive in Manchester. And so now you have to, each person pays 25% of that cost. Does that make sense? So it's 25% of the profits and 25% of the cost, or what's opposite of profits? Losses as well. If it ends up making a loss for whatever reason, then it's 20. You share it. You share that. Now, what happens now in this same scenario if you want to buy out one individual? So now, person A wants to buy out person B.
You have to check the value again.
They have to check the value at that particular point in time and pay him.
The amount of the new value.
They say the house costs 200k. You pay him 200,000. Percentage, which is what? 200,000. 25%. Huh? I'm saying a lot of numbers. How much is it? 25%. Four people. 50. I'm doing 50,000 pounds. No. Is that clear? Barakallahu feekum. That scenario. So anyway, the author, he mentions raḥimahullāh in relation to al-Sharikah, wa hiya ala arba'ati adrab. So it's of 4 types. Now there are 4 types. The first is ash-Sharikatul ʿinān. Sharikatul ʿinān. وشركة العنان أن يشترك بمالهما وبدنيهما. So the cooperation in this regard is with their wealth and their labor. So here the word badan literally means their bodies. So when referring to body, of course, is referring to their labor. Their labor. So they both, it's a joint venture, and they both agree to put money in and to equally work on this venture. And who can think of an example how that could occur? No.
You buy a plot of land.
Buy a plot of land, yeah.
You need to work on it.
To do what? Now, vegetation, for example. So you buy the plot of land, and then you both work to allow that to occur, to the vegetation to grow. Does that make sense, Barakallahu? This particular form of Sharikah, Ibn Mundhir, he mentions that this is yajuz al-ijma'. So it's ijma' that this particular form of Sharikah, this particular form of transaction is permissible, and there's ijma' in that regard. Now the ijma' consensus in that regard. And so no, so it has to be with that particular amount. This is conditional as well. This is conditional. The first of these conditions is that the capital that is put in has to be monetary capital. So the capital which is used has to be monetary. Now, and so upon the madhab of the Hanabila, it has to be monetary, as well as the fact that you cannot use, because it's monetary, you cannot use now what is referred to as urūd al-tijara. Urūd al-tijara. Urūd al-tijara referring to commodities that are used. Now, so you can't use, for example, a commodity to trade with that, if that makes sense. So you have to use, if you're going to go into a joint venture, everyone has to put in monetary capital. And they can't say, for example, I'm going to put in this iPad is worth £200, and then you're going to put in £200. Does that make sense? It has to be, both of them have to put in that which is monetary. So they both say, I'm going to put in £200 sterling, for example. Naam, واضح? طيب. And the second, in order for this to be permissible, second condition, so that's the first condition, that has to be monetary. Second is that the juz, so the portion that each person has to be stipulated. Naam. So the portion has to be stipulated. What we're referring to is the portion of the ribh, the portion of the profit has to be stipulated. So this doesn't necessarily have to be based upon item, the money that is put in doesn't necessarily have to be based upon percentages. So the first example we mentioned with the house, that's all based upon percentages. Now, why? Why is this different from that? Do you remember the example of the house? Now, why is this different from that? There's no labor. Now, so now we're discussing, we're discussing in this case two particular things that are within that transaction. We have the mal, so the capital which is put in, as well as the badan, so well as the labor. So due to that, you cannot now say that this particular percentage is stipulated. Why? Because some person A may put in X amount of money and a small amount of labor, while person B puts in less money but more labor. for example. So it's not necessarily stipulated what the capital is that's put in terms of the money that's put in, but what is stipulated is what is the value in terms of the profit. What is the profit that is taken from that? Because essentially, even if we just keep it simple, there's only two parties. One person, his labor may be valued more than another's. So person A's labor may be valued more than person B. And so if his labor is valued more, then that should be reflected in the profit share. Is that clear? Now, so this is the distinct difference between the two. So this is the first type of the Sharikah. But the condition is that this has to be stipulated. So the share of the profit has to be stipulated. Naam. The second type is الشركة الوجوه وهي أن يشترك فيما يشتريان بجاهيهما. نعم. And so the second is that they both put capital in, so they both place capital in order to buy a commodity that is going to be used for tijara. So they both place capital in. So this now is relative to that first example we mentioned with the house, because now this is an example of placing just capital in. Now I'm just placing capital in that particular transaction. Is that clear, Barakallahu Feekum? And so whatever is profited, then it's between the two of them. Whatever is profit is between the two of them. And of course, the opposite, if there's any loss, then it's between the two of them. So then this would be based upon the money that they put in. So this will be based upon the particular amount that they've placed in that transaction. So the share. So this is the second. The third is what is referred to as al-muḍārabah. وهي أن يرفع أحدهما إلى آخر مالا يتجر ويشتركان في ربحه. And so the third is where one of them pays the money for the other to use in order to trade with. And then they both take a share of the profit. So this is just similar to essentially investment. So, and what would they call that, generally speaking? Does anyone know? What type of investment? Venture capital. Yeah, that's on a bigger scale. I don't even know what kind of investment it's referred to. I haven't heard the term silent investor. Now, it's similar to a silent investor or silent partner. Now, a silent partner. The clue's in the name. Just give me the money. I don't want to hear from you. In terms of essentially what you find this particular transaction, this type of Sharikah would be in the case of the person has capital. So the person has a degree of money, but he doesn't have maybe the skill in a particular field. So he's not going to excel in trading, for example. He's not going to excel in that trade. but he has the money to put into it that could produce profits. Or possibly he can, but he doesn't have the time. So there's a mani'. There's essentially a mani'. There's something that prevents him from engaging in the trade himself, but he has the money to put into it. So he puts the money into it, and he gives the individual that money, and he leaves them to it. He leaves them to it. And so they act as as mentioned, the silent partner. They act as the silent partner. And so in this situation, the person benefits from whatever profits come from it. Whatever profits come, then they agree upon a share. They agree upon a share. Why? Why does a share need to be agreed beforehand? And this is conditional, of course, again. Now, because it involves labor again, so it involves again a cross between capital and labor. A cross between the capital being placed in and the labor being used as well. Because if we just made it reliant upon capital and a portion of capital, of course it wouldn't make sense. Why? Who's going to make money? No, the problem is he's going to make all the money. Because if you're saying it's based upon capital, he's put all of the money in. So he's put all of the money in. So then the one that's doing the work doesn't take any share of it. Because this isn't something which is just. Because he's working essentially for free, as they say. So now it's a case of he puts the money in, and then they agree a share of what is going to be taken from the profits. And of course they're going to agree a share and what will be liable for the profits is one side, and on the other side losses. They have to agree a share. Because again, the opposite is true as well. The person could pay all this money in, and he gives the money, and the person that's trading doesn't trade in a manner which is befitting, and it causes a loss. It cannot now be said that loss now is completely liable upon the one that's paid the money in, that paid the capital in. They're both susceptible for that. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. So that's the third. That's the third type. Then we have the fourth. Is ash-Sharikah al-abdān. Sharikah al-abdān. وهي أن يشتركا فيما يكسبان بأبدانهما من المباح إما بالصناع واحتشاش واصطياد كما روي عن عبد الله بن مسعود رضي الله عنه. And so the fourth is Sharikah al-abdān, where there's essentially they both work together in the manner of labor. So this particular issue here, there's no capital that's placed in. There's not necessarily capital that's placed in. It's the labor that will bring about the profits. The labor that bring about the profits. And examples that are mentioned is manufacturing something, building something, as well as, for example, hunting. So hunting, this is inclusive of hunting or fishing. Where, let's use the example of fishing, that they both agree to go fishing together. They both agree to go fishing together. And whatever is made and they make the money off of that. They sell it, and then they share the profit in that. They share the profit in that. So it's not necessarily any capital been put into it. Generally, of course, all of these things, there's going to be a degree of capital, but that's not the main focus of the Sharikah. The main focus is their labor. Is that clear, Barakallahu Feekum? It's not a case of, for example, that large amounts of capital needs to be put in order to do the labor. Of course, you may need some of the tools, but once you have the tools, you have the tools. And so, with that, the focus is upon the labor. So then they come to an agreement based upon what they're going to do. And and this is the fourth type. Likewise, Ibn Qudāmah goes on to mention وَالرِّبْحُ فِي جَمِيعِ ذَلِكَ عَلَى مَا شَرَطَاهُ. And so the ribh, the profit, is made based upon what the two of them have stipulated, what has been stipulated. Okay, and we mentioned earlier that is something which is conditional. وَوَضْعِيَّةُ عَلَى قَدْرِ الْمَالِ. And so, as for the loss, then the loss is based upon the amount as well. وَلَا يَجُوزُ أن يجعل لأحدهما درهم أو درهم معينة ولا ربح شيء معين. And it's not permissible for one of them to stipulate to the other a specified amount. A specified amount without any profit, without discussing profit. So what is understood from that, Barakallahu Feekum, again, give the example that if now 4 people bought the house and then whoever's organizing it says, no matter what, I'm going to give you £500, for example. I'm going to give you £500 every month. This specified amount, the specified mablagh, is not permissible. Because now this is not based upon profits. It's not based on profits. Because it may be a case of the person's share doesn't equal to £500 every month. Even though, let's say, for example, the person says, but the rent is £2,000 a month. The rent is £2,000 a month in London. And so I should be accepting £500 a month. A person cannot stipulate this particular amount, one particular amount. Why? It could fall into ribā, specifying the amount.
It's not just.
It's not just, and it's not the transaction. It's not a transaction. The person didn't buy, the person bought what? He bought a share. He bought a share of that particular entity, in this case, the house. Now, he bought a share of the house. So the house may make money, may lose money. For example, it may lose money if there's work that needs to be done to the house. So the person now, if all individuals are acting as the landlord of the house, because they own the house, then they're responsible for the costs, whether that be, for example, repairs. So now, let's say again, it makes £2,000 for the month, and then the repairs come up to £300. Then their share is going to be different. Their share will be different. It's not a case where they can now stipulate and say that my share is going to be, for example, £400 or £500. No, in this case, it'll be £425 because it's not stipulated. You can't stipulate a particular amount, and that's what we understand from that. Is that clear, Barakallahu Feekum? Does that make sense? So you can't stipulate يعني the amount. And the author goes on to mention والحكم في المساكن والمزارع كذلك. And this ruling still applies as well to when it comes to irrigating of land or farming of land as well. So when it comes to whatever comes from the farming of land and harvesting, then the same ruling applies. You take from the share of it. نعم. وتجبر الوضيعة من الربح لأن الربح هو الفاضل عن رأس المال. And so likewise it's obligatory that this is mentioned previously, that the loss is applied just as the profit is applied. Now loss is applied just as the profit is applied. So the profit, of course, is the fadl al-ra's al-mal, so that which exceeds the capital, the initial capital that is put in. And so likewise loss, that which is less than the initial capital put in, then they have to take the share of that. Now, and so thereafter, this is وَلَيْسَ لِأَحَدٍ بَيْعُ النَّسِيئَةِ. وَلَيْسَ لِأَحَدٍ بَيْعُ النَّسِيئَةِ. Well, nasi'ah is referring to يعني where the person may sell their share as or in place of a loan. And so this method of nasi'ah is another form of ribā. Do you remember what this form of ribā, how it occurs, or surah, how it appears? Nasi'ah. I believe we discussed it. We covered it. Do you remember? So in nasi'ah, for example, you have a commodity, so a car. Let's use a car for now. And you stipulate, for example, that person A is going to sell the car to person B. Now, so person A is going to sell the car to person B. So it says, I'm going to sell the car to you for £5,000. Now, I'm going to sell the car to you for £5,000. Or I'm going to buy the car for you for £5,000, for example. But you have to buy the car back for 5,500. And this is all within one transaction. Does that make sense? Shall I mention it again? So you sell the car for 5,000. But in that same transaction, it's stipulated that after, let's say, 3 months, you can sell it back to me for 5,500. Now, this in and of itself is ribā, and it's just a manner of disguising it, because it's still what's the difference now between a person saying, I'm going to give you £5,000, and in 3 months' time you give me £5,500 back. Now, all they've done is place the car in the middle of that transaction, but essentially there's still fadl that is mentioned. Is that clear, barakallahu feekum? So now when it comes to this particular matter of Sharikah, if a person now has their share in a venture, they cannot now say, I'm going to sell my share to you for X amount, but I'm going to buy it back off you for X amount, more. So it doesn't. This is now enters into the discussion of ribā. Naam, and it's an extension of that. Naam. Likewise, and the final thing mentioned in this, by Ibn Qudāmah, he mentioned, وَلَا أَخْذُ شَيْءٍ مِنْ الرِّبْحِ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ الْآخَرِ. And it's not permissible to take anything from the Prophet except with the permission of the other. Except with the permission of the other. So you can't take from the Prophets except with the permission of the person you're in the venture with. Why? The person can say, it's my share. Why can't I just take it? Why can't I take from it? If it might, so it could be a means of increasing that profit.
Their efforts play the part in earning the wealth.
It could. So if you're talking about the labor, the efforts to pay the part in it, no. But he said this is my stipulated amount, so I can't just take it.
They're not allowed to stipulate it.
Afwan, when I say my stipulated amount, my stipulated, I need share. So when it says this is my stipulated share, so why can't I just take it? It's my share. 50% is mine, so why can't I just take it? Someone knows that he doesn't know. No, so that it could. What he perceives to be profit may not be profit. Okay, let's say that it's all the costs are done, and it's actually profit. Essentially, the way that you have to look at this money is that let's say, for example, they've all put a certain amount of money in, right? That money now belongs to that venture, right? So what we understand from that is that the money can now be reinvested, or as mentioned earlier, the money could increase the profit. So now, when that money is placed in, there has to be an agreement before it's taken out, because when it's taken out, then obviously now it can't be reinvested, and so now that affects the venture as a whole. And so the person A, for example, in his mind is 6 months out, 6 months in, I'm taking my money out. Person B, in his mind, he's like, this is going to grow and grow and grow, and I'm going to take it out after 10 years. Or I'm going to start spending from it after 10 years. And so they have different ideas of when to take it out. So now they have to come to an agreement, because that money essentially is tied into that transaction. And even though you own a portion of that profit at that time, it's not for you to take. It's not just for you to take. And as mentioned in the madhab of the Hanabila, if it is taken, then this is now regarded as a dain fi dhimma. It's regarded as you have taken money out of that business or that venture, and so now you have a dain, you have a debt that you've taken. And so some people do operate like that, where they take money out of a business and they take it as a loan from the business. But of course it should be done with an agreement. But if a person for whatever reason just takes it, then he owes that money back into that venture. Unless there's an agreement. Is that clear, Barakallahu Feekum? And that concludes, alhamdulillah, what we want to discuss regarding this matter of ash-Sharikah. Just looking forward as well, Allah Ta'ala knows best, but I'm of the thinking that we will conclude the next few chapters regarding Kitab al-Bay'. So the chapter regarding the transactions. We'll discuss the ijara. So a person, ujra, taking a wage or rental. And thereafter, we will go just directly to Kitab al-Nikah, inshallah. Now, Kitab al-Nikah, and following that talaq, inshallah. So we'll leave some of the chapters that are in between, because some of those chapters maybe it's better that they're studied separately. For example, the mirath, the inheritance, is maybe better that it has its own separate lesson. It has its own separate lesson, inshallah. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. So that's the thinking I'm having at the moment. Just as a heads up. جزاكم الله خيرا وبارك الله فيكم وصلى الله وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. نعم.
Is there anything wrong with a group of people who come together to do a Sharikah and appoint one of them as the head to make all the decisions, such as when money can be taken out and so on?
So they all go into this venture, but they appoint one to make certain decisions. But it has to be a case of that's within an agreement. So if they say, for example, let's say, for example, the final decision is with person A, then this is permissible. Because you can leave that final decision with one individual because he might be khabir. He might have the most amount of experience in that particular regard, and so his decision is the most trusted within that group. No, this is okay. And this is generally how business will operate, isn't it? That you will have, even though it's we always look at things with the lens of the Deen, Kitab, and the Sunnah. But when we look at business, how they operate, of course, generally speaking, that those decisions lead up to one individual, and that's that final decision, whether that's the CEO, CFO, or CS, or whatever. No.
The silent investor, is it permissible to buy him out? And if it is, can you stipulate that beforehand?
So the silent investor, is it permissible to buy him out? So
Later.
so you have the person is invested.
But from the start, you say, okay, in 2 years' time, we'll give you money back and no more profit.
Oh, so like that. So you're saying now, there's two different questions.
Yeah.
Should we do the first one first? So now, to buy him out is fine. So let's say, for example, he takes, let's say, for example, just for ease, he takes 50% of the profits. So his share essentially is 50%. Then after a few years, you say, okay, I want to buy out your share. And you come to agree about what his share is worth. Now, and you buy it. And then so now the profit is 100% yours now at that point. That's fine. The second is where you say you're going to get your money back and then whatever profits. This would not be permissible. Why? Because you have a stipulated amount in that regard. So now, say for example, a person's put in £2,000, and then you say you're going to get the £2,000 back. So in the agreement, it says £2,000 back, and then X amount on top of that. No, because at that point you've stipulated a particular amount. And then what difference is that between saying, can you lend me £2,000, and then in a year's time I'm going to give you £2,000 back and something on top? What's the difference between that and that? Obviously, this is the second one, the example I mentioned. There's ribā, and it's clearly ribā, but there's no difference. It's just different wordings used essentially. And Allah Ta'ala knows best. No.
They're going to share the profit. However, one of them is going to put in labor, i.e., work. Say, for example, it's an apartment that they both put capital into. One of them is going to be the one that's overseeing the maintenance.
Yeah. He's going to be managing it, for example.
Yeah. He takes a wage for that.
Yeah.
But isn't that a stipulated amount as well?
No, so then this would be a different, it's almost like a separate contract. So let's say, for example, not almost, it is a separate contract. So let's say, for example, now, we both bought a property, 50-50, right? You put 50,000 in, he's put 50,000 in. Now, after that, you say, I want to manage it, okay? You come to an agreement about what that management is going to be. Let's say the management is going to be 10% of the rent, right? So let's say it's £1,000, 10% of the rent, £100, right? That's a separate contract because that contract could be held with anyone. So me and you, we could own the property, 50-50. But then we could ask Musa to manage it and say you take 10%. But I'm saying, no, I will manage it. But based upon that, I'm going to take that 10%. Understand? So it's a separate dealing altogether. It becomes problematic if you stipulate that in the initial transaction. Now, if you stipulate an initial transaction where you say, I own 50% and you take 50% on the condition that I can manage it for 10%, then this is problematic. Why? There's two contracts within one now. But if there's two separate contracts, then this is fine. Now, the two separate contracts, this is fine. Another way to look at it as well is, let's say, for example, same thing, house, just 4 people to make it a bit easier. 4 people this time. 4 people own it, 25% each. And then I say, I want to rent it. I say, I want to live in there. Nah, I want to live in there. I own 25% of it though. So I can still rent it. And essentially I'll be paying 75% of the rent. Why? Because the rest obviously I'll be essentially paying myself. So you're paying 75% of the rent. And that's fine. If it's completely separate. It's separate where anyone can rent and I'm saying I'm going to rent it. The problem comes if I stipulate in that initial dealing that I'm going to rent it. So you say, for example, I'm not entering into this dealing, there's 25%, unless I can rent the property afterwards. That now is where you enter the two contracts within one, which is not permissible. But essentially now you can if you're going to manage it, that can be done separately, inshallah. And even on top of that as well, you could say, I'm going to manage it and I'm going to rent it. So I'm going to manage it and I'm going to rent it. And then obviously that may bring down the rent, the rent that you end up paying. If that makes sense, but I can't feel. I'm not here.
Imagine there's 3 people in the business
Mm-hmm.
and they have a dispute, and 2 people want to buy out the third, but they don't have his permission.
They don't have his permission.
Yeah, because they've had a dispute.
So person A and B have had a dispute with person C.
Yeah.
So it's 2 against 1. Okay.
And they want to buy out person C because they want to do business with him.
We don't want to work with him anymore. Okay.
He's not agreeing. He's like, I still want the share.
Then this is share. They can, like, it's because it's like anything. It's like, for example, that notepad. I can't say I want to buy it from you, so sell it to me. It's your right. It's your haq. So now, if, for example, let's say that in scenario, person A, person B, person C. Person A and person B don't want to cooperate with person C anymore. They want to work together. They want to buy him out. He has the right to keep it or not because it's his haq. He could say, for example, I don't want to sell it because I believe that it's going to increase in value later on. So why should I be forced to sell it? Or he can just feel I just want to sell it for whatever reasons. It doesn't matter what his reason is, really. These 2 individuals cannot force that third individual to sell it because it's his property. That share is his property. So you can't force anyone to sell something that belongs to another. So you wouldn't be able to do that just because the majority disagree with him, for example, in that scenario. No. Allah. الله خير. الله فيكم يا اخوان. الله يحفظكم.